4 times a night, every single night, 4 times. I would lie down, finally close my eyes, drift off for maybe 90 minutes, and then there it was. That pressure, that pull, that non-negotiable signal that meant hauling myself out of a warm bed, shuffling down a dark hallway, and standing over a toilet at 1 a.m. wondering what I had done to deserve this. My wife started sleeping with earplugs because of the noise, the shuffling, the creak of the floorboard I could never avoid at 2 a.m., the faint sound of the bathroom door clicking shut for the 3rd time before sunrise. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I saw it in her face every morning over coffee, the concern she was trying to hide, the question she didn't want to ask. I was 61 years old and my bladder had become my alarm clock, and nobody, not my GP, not my urologist, not the 3 different supplements I'd already ordered off the internet, could give me a straight answer about why. Here's what I was told. Thomas, your prostate is enlarged. That's what's causing the frequent urination. It's very common for men your age. And for a year and a half, I believed that. I followed the advice. I took the medication they prescribed. I cut out coffee, which, if you've ever loved coffee the way I love coffee, is its own quiet kind of grief. I stopped drinking anything after 7 p.m. I did all the things they told me to do. And every single night, I was still up 4 times, still exhausted by noon, still watching the life I wanted to be living get smaller and smaller while my world shrank to the distance between my bedroom and my bathroom. What I discovered at 61, what genuinely changed everything, had almost nothing to do with my prostate. And I want to spend the next 20 or so minutes sharing exactly what I found, because I believe with everything I have that it could give you back the sleep you have been losing, possibly for years. I'll tell you right now, there are 3 specific factors driving nighttime urination in men that most urologists simply do not address in a standard 15-minute appointment. I found all 3 the hard way, through obsessive research and trial and error, and a lot of sleepless nights that I refuse to accept as permanent. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what those 3 factors are, why they work the way they do in your body, and what you can actually do, starting tonight, to begin turning this around. So stay with me, because the 3rd factor especially, the one I almost missed completely, might be the most eye-opening thing you hear today. I'll get to it, I promise. But I need to show you the full picture first. Let me paint you that picture, because I spent an entire year thinking about this problem completely wrong. When a man over 50 walks into a doctor's office complaining about getting up at night to urinate, the medical term is nocturia, which is really just a clinical way of saying your bladder has taken complete control of your life. The first thing most physicians do is evaluate the prostate, and that reflex makes anatomical sense. The prostate gland sits right at the base of the bladder, wrapped around the urethra like a collar around a pipe. When it enlarges, which happens to the majority of men as they age, driven by hormonal shifts and a molecule called dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, it squeezes that urethra the way someone steps on a garden hose. Flow gets restricted. The bladder works harder to push urine out. It never fully empties. You feel the urge to go more frequently because there's always residual volume sitting there. That is real. That happens. My prostate was absolutely enlarged. But here is the critical thing I didn't understand for 18 months of misery. An enlarged prostate explains a weak stream. It explains the stop and start. It explains that maddening, humiliating feeling of standing there for 2 minutes while barely anything comes out. What it does not fully explain is why you are waking up every 90 minutes in the middle of the night specifically. That nighttime waking. That's a different problem with different drivers. And when you spend 18 months treating the wrong problem, you get the results I got, which is to say absolutely none. Think about what Nocturia actually costs a man, not the clinical consequences, the real cost, the human cost. I was short-tempered with my adult kids at family dinners because I was operating on 4 fragmented hours of sleep. I fell asleep during a movie with my grandchildren, twice in the same month, and woke up to find them looking at me with that worried expression kids get when they think something is wrong with Grandpa. I turned down a camping trip with my old college roommates, men I'd known for 40 years, because the idea of navigating bathroom trips in a tent, in the dark, in 40-degree weather, I just couldn't face it. I made an excuse. They didn't push. And I sat home that weekend feeling like a piece of who I was had already gone ahead and checked out without me. Nocturia doesn't just steal your sleep, it steals your identity, quietly and incrementally, until you find yourself organizing your entire existence around your bladder. And the worst part, the part nobody tells you in that urology waiting room, is that nocturia in men over 50 is almost never caused by a single thing. There are multiple systems misfiring simultaneously. The prostate is one piece of a much larger puzzle. When my urologist handed me a prescription and said, "This should help with the urination," he was adjusting one variable in a system with 5 broken variables. No wonder the needle didn't move. I thought it was just aging. I thought I had to accept it. Most men I've met in this situation think the same thing. You sit in that waiting room and you look around, and every man has the same quietly defeated expression, the same measured way of moving, the same resigned slant to his shoulders. That's what this condition does when it goes unaddressed. It convinces you that surrender is the reasonable response. I am not built for surrender. That stubbornness is what eventually pushed me toward the answer. I want to be completely transparent with you about who I am, because I think it matters before I ask you to trust what I'm about to share. I am not a physician. I don't have a medical license or a diploma on the wall. What I have is 4 years of relentless, sometimes obsessive research, driven by the simple fact that I was not willing to live the rest of my life the way I was living it at 61. I read everything I could get my hands on: Healthline, WebMD, peer-reviewed studies that I had to work through slowly and sometimes reread 3 times before the language made sense to me. Patient forums where men were discussing things they would never bring up with their doctors. I joined a prostate health support group, which requires a particular kind of humility when you're a man who spent 60 years believing he could solve his own problems. I talked to survivors. I asked the uncomfortable questions that most people are too embarrassed to raise in a clinical setting. The most important credential I can offer you is this: I am sitting here at 65, 4 years after my diagnosis, sleeping through the night. Not like a 20-year-old sleeps, but 6.5 to 7 solid hours. Sometimes with a single brief wake-up, sometimes with none at all. I reversed symptoms that 2 separate urologists described to me as an inevitable consequence of aging. I did it without surgery, without maintaining long-term medication, and I am genuinely convinced that what I learned in those 4 years of digging is directly applicable to most of the men who are watching this right now. When I share this in my support group, the response I hear over and over is some version of, "Thomas, why didn't my doctor tell me any of this?" I don't have a satisfying answer to that question. But that question is exactly why I keep making these videos. So let's get into it. What is actually causing a man to wake up 4 times a night? Let me take you through the 3 factors I identified, starting with the first one, the one that reframed everything. Factor 1 is something called nocturnal polyuria. The name sounds intimidating, but the mechanism is elegantly simple. Under normal circumstances, your body releases a hormone overnight called ADH, antidiuretic hormone, also called vasopressin. And this hormone acts as a chemical signal to your kidneys. Slow down, reduce urine production, let this person sleep. It's the biological reason that a healthy person can sleep 7 or 8 hours without a single bathroom trip. Their kidneys are essentially on a nighttime pause. What the research shows, including data from multiple studies referenced through the National Institutes of Health and reviewed in depth by organizations like the American Urological Association, is that in a significant portion of men over 50, this overnight ADH release becomes disrupted. The kidneys never receive a clear, slow-down signal. They keep filtering at roughly the same rate they do at 2 in the afternoon. Your prostate could be perfectly healthy and you'd still be up every 90 minutes. In my case, my prostate was enlarged and my ADH rhythm was dysregulated. I was fighting two completely separate battles using a treatment strategy built for only one of them. The question that matters is what disrupts ADH? The primary culprits, based on what I read and what I experienced, are three things working in combination: elevated evening cortisol, fragmented sleep architecture, and chronic systemic inflammation. When your body's stress response is chronically activated, and most men in their 60s are carrying sustained loads of work stress, financial pressure, relationship tension, health anxiety, cortisol remains elevated well into the evening hours, long past when it should have tapered. Elevated cortisol interferes with the hormonal sequence that triggers your nighttime ADH release. This connection between stress physiology and overnight urine production is one that almost never comes up in a 15-minute urology appointment. But it is documented, it is real, and it is something you can directly address starting this week. Factor 2 is bladder overactivity, and this is the one that genuinely shocked me when I finally understood what was happening. The prostate enlargement I described earlier, with its partial obstruction of the urethra, creates a downstream consequence that persists even if you address the prostate directly. The bladder's main muscle, called the detrusor, is forced to generate higher pressure to push urine past a narrowed opening. Over months and years of doing that, the muscle becomes hypertrophied and hypersensitive. It begins generating urgent "I'm full" signals to the brain, even when the bladder is holding a relatively small volume. The nerve pathway between the bladder and the brain becomes essentially a hair trigger. Even if you resolved every prostate issue tomorrow, even surgically, that overactive, hypersensitized muscle would keep firing false alarms. It has to be addressed as its own separate problem. And I'll show you exactly how I did that. Factor 3, the one I teased at the beginning, the one I nearly overlooked entirely, is dietary inflammation and its direct effect on bladder tissue. This one surprised me the most, and it produced some of the fastest visible results. The inner lining of the bladder, a layer called the urothelium, is remarkably sensitive to chemical irritants. Certain foods and compounds cause direct inflammatory responses in this lining, making it reactive and hypersensitive even in the complete absence of any infection or structural problem. The common culprits are ones you might expect: alcohol, even in small evening amounts, caffeine, artificial sweeteners. But the one that genuinely blindsided me was high-sodium foods eaten in the evening. When you consume a high-sodium meal at dinner, your body draws fluid into the bloodstream to balance osmotic pressure. And several hours later, right around when you're settling into your first sleep cycle, your kidneys are in high gear excreting that excess sodium load, pulling water right along with it. I eliminated my nightly ritual of crackers and sharp cheddar before bed, a habit I'd had for probably 15 years. Within 12 days, my 1 a.m. wake-up vanished. One habit, 12 days, gone. The key to connecting those three factors and understanding how they were specifically affecting me was tracking. Because you cannot address what you cannot measure, and I had been going on pure guesswork for too long. What I ate each evening, when I stopped drinking fluids, my stress and energy levels through the day, how many times I woke, roughly what time each waking occurred. All of it needed to be recorded so I could start seeing the patterns. That's actually when I found the tomato app, and it became a genuine turning point in my process. It's built specifically for this kind of daily prostate and bladder health tracking. I left the link in the pinned comment below if you want to take a look. It's what helped me finally connect the dots between what was happening during the day and what was happening at 3 a.m. The correlations that surfaced in my data were things I never would have caught just running it in my head. Once I understood all three factors, I stopped trying to fix one thing and built a protocol that addressed all of them at the same time. For the ADH disruption and the cortisol piece, two changes did most of the heavy lifting. The first was restructuring my fluid intake. I moved roughly 70% of my daily fluid consumption to before 5 p.m., then tapered sharply through the evening. I wasn't eliminating water. I still drank maybe 6 to 8 ounces in total after dinner, but the dramatic front-loading of fluids during daylight hours meant my kidneys were doing most of their work when I was awake to handle it. The second change was a 10-minute breathing practice every night at 9 o'clock, specifically box breathing. 4 counts inhale, hold for 4. 4 counts exhale, hold for 4. There is solid and consistent evidence that this breathing pattern activates the parasympathetic nervous system and measurably reduces evening cortisol. I felt almost nothing the first week. The third week, I went from 4 bathroom trips to 2. I stood in the kitchen the morning after that first 2-trip night and just stood there for a moment because I didn't know what to do with myself. 2 trips felt like a gift. For the overactive bladder, I worked on a practice called bladder retraining, and it requires patience, but it works. The concept is straightforward. During the day, when you feel an urge to urinate, you deliberately delay acting on it. Start with 5 minutes, then push to 10, then 15. You're not torturing yourself. You're gradually teaching the nerve signals between your bladder and your brain that the urge is not an emergency, that the bladder can hold more, that the signal can be trusted less. A 2021 review of studies on overactive bladder, referenced across major consumer health publications, including Healthline, found that structured bladder retraining programs reduced nighttime urination episodes by up to 54% in symptomatic men. That number, when I first read it, made me put the article down and just stare at the wall for a minute. I want to tell you about Robert. I met Robert in my prostate health support group about 3 years ago. He was 68, a retired firefighter from a small town in Ohio, and he had been living with Nocturia for 6 years. 6 years of waking 3, 4, sometimes 5 times a night. He'd undergone 2 separate procedures on his prostate. 2. He was on 2 different medications. He had restructured his entire sleep schedule around the problem. And nothing had meaningfully reduced the nighttime waking. When I walked the group through the ADH disruption mechanism during one of our monthly meetings, Robert went very quiet. Then he slowly put his head in his hands. When he looked up, he said, "Nobody told me that. In 6 years, not one doctor brought that up." His voice had that particular texture of a man who has just realized he's been working on the wrong problem for a very long time. Robert implemented the fluid timing protocol and the nightly breathing practice over 4 weeks. He called me on a Saturday morning about 8 weeks after that. He didn't bother with a greeting. The first words out of his mouth were, "I slept through the night on Thursday." Then he couldn't talk for a moment. I couldn't either. After 6 years, this man slept through the night. That phone call is one of the clearest memories I have from this entire journey, and it reminds me every time I consider stopping these videos that there are men exactly like Robert watching this right now, sitting in the dark at 3 a.m., convinced that this is just what their life is now. It does not have to be. Let me address the pushback I hear most often, because I expect you might be sitting on it. "Thomas, if my prostate is enlarged, aren't you telling me to just ignore that?" Absolutely not. The prostate genuinely matters and absolutely needs to be monitored and managed, especially if there's any concern about cancer, which was a factor in my own diagnosis. What I'm saying is that treating only the prostate while ignoring the ADH rhythm disruption, the overactive detrusor, and the dietary inflammatory triggers is like patching one hole in a boat that has 4 leaks. You'll bail water all day and still sink. I continued working closely with my urologist throughout this entire process. I simply added layers he wasn't providing. Those additional layers are what finally moved the needle. The evidence backing the dietary inflammation piece specifically is substantial. A 2022 analysis examining the relationship between dietary patterns and lower urinary tract symptoms, cited across peer-reviewed sources and consumer health platforms alike, found that men following a consistent anti-inflammatory dietary approach showed a 38% average improvement in nighttime urination frequency over 12 weeks. The most impactful dietary changes were increasing omega-3 fatty acid consumption through fatty fish, walnuts, and ground flaxseed, while simultaneously reducing processed sodium and eliminating or dramatically limiting evening alcohol. I started eating salmon twice a week and added a tablespoon of ground flaxseed to my breakfast every morning. Those 2 changes felt trivially small. Their cumulative effect over 2 months was not small at all. There's one more layer I want to add, because most videos and articles about Nocturia stop before they reach it. Sleep architecture itself is part of this system, in a way that creates a genuinely vicious loop. Here's how it works. When your bladder wakes you up at night, you lose deep, slow-wave sleep. And it's precisely during slow-wave sleep that your body's ADH secretion peaks. That's when your kidneys receive the strongest slow-down signal. So your bladder waking you up prevents you from reaching the sleep stage that would produce the hormone that would stop your bladder from waking you up. Round and round it goes. You aren't just sleep deprived, you are physiologically locked in a self-reinforcing cycle. The only way to break it is to attack the input side, which means addressing the cortisol elevation and the dietary triggers that prevent the ADH rhythm from establishing itself in the first place. That's why the order of operations matters. You can't fix the sleep if you don't fix what's disrupting it. There's also a metabolic dimension I didn't stumble onto until about 18 months into my research, and it blindsided me. Men with insulin resistance, which is far more prevalent in men over 50 than most people realize, often without any formal diabetes diagnosis, and often with normal fasting glucose numbers, can experience something called osmotic diuresis at night. When blood sugar is chronically elevated, even modestly, the kidneys work to filter and excrete excess glucose, and they pull large amounts of water along in the process. That surge in overnight urine production has nothing to do with your prostate, nothing to do with your bladder, and everything to do with metabolic health. If you have not had your fasting insulin level and your HbA1c checked in the past 12 months, that is a specific and important conversation to have with your doctor at your next appointment. Let me give you the most practical version of everything I've shared, because I want you leaving this video with things you can actually do. The first thing you can do is tonight, before you go to bed, think through everything you consumed in the past 4 hours. How much total fluid? Did any of it include caffeine? Even decaf has trace amounts. Alcohol or artificial sweeteners? Did you eat anything high in sodium? Crackers, cured meats, store-bought soups, even some breads that are surprisingly salty. Write that down, not a mental note. Actually write it on paper or your phone. Then tomorrow evening, cut total fluids after 7 p.m. to roughly 8 ounces total, and remove any of those irritant foods from your post-dinner routine. Run that experiment for 3 consecutive nights. The data you gather from that 3-night experiment will tell you more about your personal triggers than 18 months of guessing. The second action involves tomorrow morning. Add 1 level tablespoon of ground flaxseed to your breakfast, into oatmeal, a smoothie, yogurt, whatever you eat in the morning. You will not taste it. Flaxseed is among the richest plant-based sources of omega-3 fatty acids and lignans, compounds which multiple research reviews have connected to measurable reductions in prostate inflammation and lower urinary tract symptom severity. This is not a dramatic overnight intervention. It is a daily contribution to a lower systemic inflammation load, and that kind of contribution compounds in a meaningful way over 6 to 8 weeks. The third action is for the daytime urgency, the overactive bladder piece that bleeds into nighttime. When you feel the sudden urge to go during the day, try this before you walk to the bathroom. Stop moving, sit or stand completely still. Perform 5 quick pelvic floor contractions. Squeeze the muscles you would use to stop the flow of urine midstream. Hold 2 seconds each, and then take 6 slow breaths. Then go. This technique is called urge suppression, and it works by activating pelvic floor muscles that send an inhibitory signal to the detrusor, dampening the contraction. With consistent practice over 4 to 6 weeks, you are literally rewiring the neural pathway between your bladder and your brain. Ask your doctor specifically about pelvic floor physical therapy for men. It is dramatically underutilized, carries essentially no side effects, and the evidence for its effectiveness in reducing overactive bladder symptoms is genuinely impressive. Finally, and this is the conversation I wish I had pushed for at 61 instead of waiting until 63, ask your physician to conduct a bladder diary assessment with you. This involves tracking and measuring your urine output across a full 24-hour period, distinguishing clearly between what happens during waking hours and what happens while you sleep. If your nighttime urine volume exceeds 33% of your total 24-hour output, you meet the clinical definition of nocturnal polyuria, and that is a distinct diagnosis, separate from BPH, with its own specific treatment options. Most general practitioners do not raise this proactively. You have to walk in and ask for it by name. I opened this video with a man shuffling to his bathroom at 2 a.m., tired, embarrassed, quietly convinced that the life he wanted was already behind him. I know that man in my bones. I was that man. And what I want to leave with you, the thing I need you to hear before you close this video, is that the conventional answer not working was not evidence that nothing would work. It was evidence that the conventional answer was looking at only one piece of a much more complicated picture. The real causes of my nocturia were living in the spaces between diagnoses, in a hormone nobody measured, in a bladder muscle nobody thought to retrain, in a bowl of crackers I ate every night for 15 years without connecting it to anything. You are not broken. You are not simply getting old. You are dealing with a layered problem that has a layered solution. And every piece of that solution, the fluid timing, the breathing, the dietary adjustments, the bladder retraining, is something you can begin working on without a scalpel, without surrendering, and without accepting that this is just the way things are now. A man named David, 71 years old, had been waking up 5 times a night for 4 years when he found my support group. 3 months after implementing this full protocol, he sent me a message on a Sunday evening. He said, "I went fishing with my son last weekend. We drove 3 hours and we stayed overnight in a tent. I woke up once." David had told me months earlier that he'd given up on overnight trips. He thought that chapter was closed. He went fishing with his son and slept in a tent at 71. That is what we are actually talking about here. Not just sleep metrics, not just fewer bathroom trips. Life. The version of your life you haven't stopped wanting. If anything I shared today connected with you, if you recognized your own life in any part of this, please subscribe to this channel. I post every single week. New research I find, protocols I test, things that worked and things that didn't. This is a community of men who refuse to just accept what they've been handed, and you belong here with us. And the tomato app I mentioned, the tracking tool that helped me finally see what my habits were doing to my nights, the link is sitting in the pinned comment below this video. It's what kept me consistent, and consistency is what made everything else work. Check it out when you're done here. I'll see you in the next one. Get some rest.